and thanks for joining us on another episode of Tea and Trowels, the series from the Florida Public Archaeology Network, where we chat with archaeologists about their research and what archaeology means to them. I'm one of your hosts, Emily Jane Murray, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Dr. David G. Anderson, a professor of anthropology at the University of Tennessee. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Oh, it's going real well. It's early morning, so I'm still waking up and drinking my coffee.
I feel you. Did you want to say anything else in terms of an introduction, and then tell us about the mug you brought?
Okay. I've been doing archaeology for about 50 years now. I took my first archaeology course in 1969 and worked in a lab, and then in the early 70s started doing field work. And mostly in the Southeast, but also in the Southwest and the Midwest and the Caribbean. And I love archaeology. It's my parents were totally appalled when I went into it. They thought I'd be living in the basement, I guess, forever. But it worked out. I think are very happy and proud of the fact that I have continued on in the field. My coffee cup is from the Paleo-American Odyssey meeting in Santa Fe in 2013. And that's a meeting of paleo specialists who study the peopling of the Americas.
Very cool. Well, I brought my, as close as I could get to it as Jean-Luc's glass of tea, Earl Grey, hot.
Very good. Well, I like Earl Grey too, and I like Star Trek and as you saw from my Vulcan symbol a minute ago, and a lot of science fiction and fantasy. In fact, behind me, that's Yoda beneath the dragon that I picked up at the SIA meetings in 2005 in Puerto Rico and carried it onto the airplane, which caused a lot of delight. It actually went through the scanner at the airport, and fortunately it wasn't hollow and filled with all kinds of things. It's just a carved dragon that I've loved.
Very cool. So what made you want to become an archaeologist?
Well, I wanted to be an astronomer, and I went to Case Institute of Technology in Cleveland, Ohio in 1967 after graduating from high school in Milledgeville, Georgia, Baldwin County High School. And partial differential equations, I would say, made me an archaeologist, because when I couldn't do the math any longer pretty quickly in my head and actually had to work at it, I realized that it wasn't a lot of fun for me. And I had taken an anthropology course just as kind of a social science elective. And I said, well, that was the most interesting course that I took. So I'm going to try taking other anthropology courses, and fell into archaeology soon after. So that's, and the rest is sort of history. I switched out of Case Institute of Technology into Western Reserve College, which was the liberal arts side of the university, and then took a lot of anthropology courses, and graduated in January of 1972, and immediately went in the field in New Mexico for about 3-4 months, volunteering on digs in the Membrace area that were occurring out there, and been doing archaeology ever since.
It's funny because somebody once jokingly told me, oh, well, the only math you need to know for archaeology is the hypotenuse of a triangle, to figure out how to set up your test units. And I'm like, yeah, this is for me. And then you realize, oh, no, there's actually just a lot of statistics involved still. So.
Yeah, I've had multiple statistics courses, and basically I've managed the data on a number of large excavations, used to with computer cards, and I learned how to type on a typewriter and then switched over to a word processor. I would say I spend far more time with math and science than I ever imagined, but I enjoy doing it, so I'm willing to work at it.
It seems a little more fulfilling too, to know that there's like people behind the numbers in a different sort of way than maybe with astronomy. So well, can you tell us about your research in about 30 seconds, which is a huge, huge thing to get, but.
Well, I'm interested in human settlement and the Americas, primarily in the Eastern North American region, and much of my work has been in the Southeast, although I have done field work in other places. As I've noted, I like big picture synthesis type of efforts, pulling together data from large areas, both for Paleo-Indian artifacts and sites, but also sites of all time periods with the PIDBA, Paleo-Indian Database of the Americas, and BINA, Digital Index of North American Archaeology projects I'm working on with a lot of people. And then I've also done a lot of field work in a lot of places, many of the states in the Southeast and beyond, the Southwest, Texas, the Caribbean, in the Virgin Islands. So quite a mixture of things. I like sites of all time periods. I've worked on everything from Paleo-Indian occupations to tenant farmsteads over the course of my career, and excavated a plantation complex in the Caribbean on a little island off of St. Thomas about 25 years ago as well. So that in a nutshell, a lot of different things.
A jack of all trades. And I'll say I've gotten to know you more recently with some of your focus on heritage at risk and sea level rise and erosion and all the threats that we're trying to tackle.
That's true. I didn't even mention that. Yeah, climate change and its effect on human populations, societies. I've been interested in that for a very long time. My dissertation research involved looking at tree ring reconstructed rainfall patterns in the Southeast, and how that may have affected the societies in the area at that time, the Savannah River Valley. So I've been writing about climate change and interested in it for over 30 years now. And it wasn't as much of a hot topic 30 years ago as it is now, no pun intended. But now the numbers of people interested in it is just remarkable and important, because our heritage is literally at risk. And I appreciate the efforts you and your colleagues are doing to help save it.
Well, do you have a favorite tool in your toolkit that you use while you work on all of these diverse topics?
Well, I have a trowel. This is a Marshalltown trowel. It's about 30 years old. I used to lose trowels fairly regularly. They're probably in units or under back dirt in sites. But this one I've actually been able to keep for about 30 years now, and it's been to the Caribbean and a number of sites in the Southeast. That's something that, as I got older, I did less and less actually digging and more supervising. And for just about every project I've ever been on, I take the pictures because I want to make sure they come out. Now, this is a modern digital camera, but I started out with a Pentax film camera in the mid 70s, and then I went to a Canon, and then that's a Sony. And I also have used video cameras and taken a lot of videos of field work. So, and then my latest tool is what we're talking on. I have an Alienware Area 51 state-of-the-art laptop that has a blazingly fast processor and 64 gigs of memory, RAM, and I do a lot on the computer. So the toolkits vary, but I like to visit other people's digs so I can actually go back to doing archaeology without worrying about supervising.
I know that's my joke. We don't really lead our own kind of field research, kind of digging excavation projects. So I just get to go visit everybody else's, and then I don't have to worry about all the paperwork. I just get to do the fun bits. So, and that makes me feel better. A lot of folks are like, "Oh, this is the very first trowel I ever had." I'm like, "Yeah, I've lost several." It's not just me.
No, I've lost a number, and it always hurt because I was told, "Oh, you're supposed to have your trowel forever." So I remember I lost my first trowel sometime in the mid-late 70s, and that really hurt. But then I just realized, things happen, and you can't worry about it. You have to go on. Now, I was digging a plantation complex on Walter Island in the Caribbean, and we were excavating an enslaved person's cabin. And one of the crew said, "Oh, I just found a trowel," and we didn't think anything of it because it's like, oh, somebody must have lost their trowel, left it behind from yesterday or something. It turns out it was a trowel on the floor, a mason's trowel from when the people left. They had left tools behind as well, and there were other tools. But so we're thinking, oh, somebody's trowel had just been found. Well, it was, but it was 160 years or so after it had been left.
That's really cool. I forget that they use trowels for other things besides just digging, right?
Yeah, for masonry, and they also are great for prying things too. I use them if I need to open tanks.
I think it's Kathy Deegan's has like a certain notch cut out of it that's just perfect for prying open bottles for after field work. Well, on the line here of field work, do you have a best worst field story that you can now laugh about?
Well, I have a lot of field stories, obviously, and the way it works is you get a bunch of archaeologists together and they start swapping stories, and it's usually who can top the next one. I was actually talking in a meeting yesterday and said the word rattlesnake came up, and I was walking into a silver mine near Tombstone, Arizona, at the Amarin Foundation about 30 years ago. I was there for a seminar. George Milner was right behind me, and we were told, watch out for the javelinas, the wild pigs that fed down in this mine, because they could charge out. So I'm walking in, looking forward, expecting to have a pig charge me, and a rattlesnake went off at my feet. And I flew backwards through the air, and I heard George saying, "Did you see the size of that snake?" And honestly, I never saw the snake because by the time I'd recovered, um, it was actually crawling under a rock, and I did see the rattles. So that's one story that had a happy ending. Another one that is probably the most well-known or widely known that was potentially quite grim, but worked out okay, was I was running a field project in Northeast Arkansas along the Langee River near a little town called Mariana. And I had a crew out in the soybean field testing, opening test pits. And a truck came roaring up, and three guys got out, two with axe handles and one with a sawed-off shotgun, and said, "Who's in charge here?" And I said, "That would be me." I have witnesses because there were a lot of people on the crew. My supervisor, Pat Garrow, happened to be visiting. I was working for Garrow and Associates at the time, so he was beside me. Tim Pocketat and a number of other archaeologists now have gone on. Preston Miracle, who's a professor at Cambridge now, but was on the crew then, were there. And it turned out that these farmers thought they had caught the people that were destroying their crops, driving around doing wheelies, things like that. So it was touch and go for about a minute, where the guy had his shotgun pointed right at me, and he cocked both barrels back, and all it would have taken for him to move his finger. And I'm sort of shakingly saying, "But we have the landowner's permission," and it was their dad who had forgot to tell them that we were out there digging. And then I named like the mayor of the town and so on. And after about a minute, the guy with the shotgun lowered his gun and said, "Well, maybe I won't kill you. Maybe I'll just beat the crap out of you." And we agreed to leave, and we went to a country store nearby, packed up. A couple of our crew had dived over the bank and hid because it was a pretty grim situation. And we met and talked, and the next day they were out digging with us, volunteering, and it worked out, but it was very touch and go. And this is something that a couple years later, 5 or 6 years later, the then president of the Arkansas Archaeological Society, the state avocational society, Scott Eckridge, was asked, "What was your most interesting day in archaeology?" And he described this. It's in field notes in the newsletter in 1993. And then in the next issue, I wrote a letter saying, "Well, here's my side of the story," which is very similar to Scott's, of course. But what the rest of you didn't know was I was driving Pat Garrow back to the airport in Memphis that night in our field vehicle, and we were hit by lightning. true story. Pat was there as a witness, and it fried the electrical system. I mean, by hit, it just means everything went greenish white around us in a thunderstorm, but it fried the electrical system, and we got picked up by a local Bubba who drove us back to where the crew was. So that was one day where we were nearly shot and in a vehicle hit by lightning. And I've never had another day like that in archaeology. And then Tim Pocketat, in his book, Chieftains and Other Archaeological Delusions, he starts off the first chapter of that book describing the incident in the field, because he was right there. And it was quite a memorable story, memorable event. And from that, you can, take a number of lessons. One, always make sure that everybody knows you're supposed to be on a piece of property. And then small incidents, although it wasn't small at the time, but if that had gone badly, there would have been large numbers of books that would never have been written, large numbers of sites that wouldn't have been dug. So it was it was after the fact. I was pretty shook up by it, obviously, but at the time, we got through it. And then just from the 3 different accounts that have been published, nobody remembers the same thing quite the same way. Which is why archaeology is important. We dig up things that are solid and tangible, but memories change. We have 3 published accounts of this incident, and they're all slightly different, which is fine. I've heard from one of the people who was there that he was at a meeting and someone just in a bar was bragging about having been there, and who clearly wasn't. So it's one of those stories that for a number of years afterwards was legendary, and people wanted to claim that they were there, or it grew in the telling. Unfortunately, now it's long past, and I can laugh about it now. But at the time, it was pretty scary.
Yeah, and then the lightning on top of it, that's quite a day.
Yeah, and fortunately, there are witnesses. There are people that are still around who can testify to this. In fact, most of us will. None of us will ever forget it. After we had met with these people, we met at a country store, talked things over. We even had a government archaeologist come out who we were doing a project for the Corps of Engineers, and he came out and met with them. We then got permission to go back onto the property and rescue the 2 people that had gone over the bank and hid, because they thought, it was going to be all over. So we got them, and I gave the crew the rest of the day off. And then the next day we were back out in the same space digging, and these guys were out there digging with us, volunteering, helping screen, that sort of thing. So it ended well, but you never know.
No, that would have been absolutely horrifying. Well, our last questions are a big one. How do you think archaeology can help save the world?
Well, the heritage at risk work that you folks do, and studying the effects of climate change on human society, past, present, and future, is something that's tremendously important. And we can offer perspectives on how people dealt with climate change in the past, what their solutions were. Obviously, one was to move. When the continental shelf flooded at the end of the Ice Age, people had to move inland, and there's some evidence that has been shown that numbers of sites increased dramatically in the interior at those times. So there are solutions of in areas that were becoming desert, of increasingly deeper wells. In South America, we have water sowing projects that the Inca did, where they have, when there's unusual fluctuations in rainfall, you have check dams, and when there's drought, you develop ways of storing water. Peoples in the Southwest did the same thing. So past solutions have shown us that we're resilient, we can adapt. We don't always, of course, the Sahara is a desert now, but that's one way that archaeology can save the world. And then hopefully we can learn by history, although it's been said that one of the lessons from history is that you want to learn it so you don't repeat it. I'm not sure how good we are at that, but archaeology gives us a perspective on how we've met challenges in the past, and not just kings and leaders and rich people. It's how ordinary people, everyday people, responded and reacted and were affected. So that's the thing about archaeology. We are interested in all aspects of human society, and so that's how I think we can save the world. I think it's an important career. I am very happy to have had a life in it, and I do still go out and look at the stars. I have binoculars, and I've worked with telescopes on occasion, so I haven't forgotten astronomy, but I think archaeology is something that I'm very happy to have spent a lifetime doing.
You can just combine it all and get into archaeoastronomy, and
I have friends that do that, and I've read about those things. I actually wrote a term paper as an undergraduate on alignments at Stonehenge. That was back when Hawkins was publishing his Stonehenge Decoded book. So I wrote a paper on that, and I've thought about it since. And when I was digging in the Caribbean in the mid 90s, there was a local guy who had a 14-inch Dobsonian reflector who would, for $75, he would come out to wherever you were and give you a star party. So I brought him over to the island I was on. We had this telescope looking at different objects, planets and nebula. So I've always maintained that tie, and I still go out. I watched the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, the near conjunction, back a couple months ago, and I enjoy those things. So, but professionally, I still don't think I have the math to do the alignment studies, things like that, like the Newark earthworks or Stonehenge.
There's like levels to it, because you're like, that just sounds crazy, and then you like read more and you're like, all right, this does make sense, and then you're like, no, maybe it's a little, maybe it does make sense. So, but I mean, people have been staring at stars for as long as there have been people. So
yeah, and it's the greatest show. I mean, at night, I think the reason we like televisions is because we've stared into fires for so long. The TV is our substitute. And the night sky, there's wonderful things going on, and the patterns people observe, like where the moon rises and sets, the sun rises and sets over time, the furthest north and south they are. Those are things people, in a few generations would observe, or the phases of the moon. So, it's something people, I'm sure, well, to my mind, have thought about for thousands, tens of thousands of years, and depicted. And so the sophistication of some of these sites doesn't surprise me at all. And there's been a lot written about that, of course, in recent years.
I think we, as like our modern culture, have just gotten so far away from being in tune with some of those things that it just seems like crazy, and like, oh wow, they figured it out. And it's like, well, if you didn't have televisions to go stare at every night, then you would have figured it out too, It's part
yeah,
of
and if you live in a city where there's lights everywhere, I'm in Knoxville at UT, but my family home's in the country in South Carolina, and it's a very different world. It's quiet. There's not very much light, so you can actually see things in the night sky. And I go out when there were comets appearing. There was one this past summer that I went out and looked at in a field out behind my house, and it's just nice to see. I mean, I would never be able to find it in my neighborhood in downtown Knoxville, but when you're in the country, it's like, wow, there's a lot out there.
Well, we have one more bonus question we've been asking folks. What's been keeping you sane over the past year?
Well, probably the same thing that's kept me sane for the last 50 or 60, or since I'm 71, a long time. I enjoy reading science fiction and fantasy. And I enjoy watching movies and on Netflix. I just discovered Netflix and Amazon Prime about a year ago. I didn't even, people, I sort of knew they existed. But television is fortunately not too addictive because it's rare you can find things on a channel that you want to watch. But unfortunately, with Netflix and Prime, you can find all kinds of wonderful things. So I've binged watched The Queen's Gambit. I used to love chess when I was younger, and then I figured out about 20 that I would never be better than the world's 300 or 400 best player, and I didn't want to do that and make no money at it either. The Queen's Gambit was a wonderful movie, and then I watch a lot of others, shows like that, Good Omens, and you name the fantasy or science. The Expanse is a show that I love. I'll watch them, and in fact, today is the day that the next episode of The Expanse comes out on Netflix. So sometime this evening, I'll watch that. So that's kept me sane, and I read a lot of archaeology, of course, but I also read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and collect it and like it. And so that's kept me sane, and it's pretty much what I've been doing all along. I've always tried to devote 2 to 4 hours a day to doing something other than archaeology work. So that's been very helpful. And again, getting a really blazingly fast computer, and I'm talking to you on a 38-inch curved color monitor that I bought all of this a few months before the pandemic started, not thinking that I would use it for anything other than research, because I didn't know Netflix and Prime at that point either. I got this big screen and fast computer, and everyone said, "Oh, you're buying this for gaming." I said, "Actually, I don't game," and I didn't know that it would be wonderful for watching TV, movies too. So it's wonderful for Zoom, but it's also, I didn't know that I was going to be using Zoom daily, hourly at the time.
If we had only known back then, we would have made sound investments and we'd all be millionaires, right?
Yeah, well, I just hope we get through this and get over this, because I do miss conferences, and interacting with people. I go into my lab, but it's always, it's a little, you have to be very cautious. And the campus is a lot more deserted than, it's unusual to go onto a campus and see very few students when there are 20, 30,000 of them that are there, but most of them are remote. So I do have people working in my lab, volunteering and working, and that's good. But even then, you have to socially distance and just be very careful. So I hope let's all get through this, and I'm looking forward to watching other T and Trowels interviews. I will say that'll be another way I binge. I wouldn't call it quite work, but it's fun to watch things like this.
Yeah, that was our goal, to have it like sort of work related, but kind of fun, and show the diversity of archaeologists and experiences, and it's not all serious. It's fun.
Oh.
So, well, thanks for joining us today, and thanks to everyone who is following along at home. Cheers, live long and prosper.
Thank you. Have a great day.